Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Unit 7. We'll go ahead and proceed from here, and I assume everyone's had a chance to read the slide. Uh, those of you who've had me for the microeconomics class probably recognize this CD. It's the one I used in the unit where we talked about u- uh, consumer utility or consumer surplus. So, with that said, let's go ahead and move on. Oh, what do we need to review last week's work, so we'll go there first. You'll remember last week we were talking about sales, and we defined a couple different ways that sales can be done. We looked at inside sales, which is if you have a storefront operation, it's the person who meets the customer. That's your sales, your floor salespeople, they refer to it. Oh, and continuing, we also have telephone reps. Sometimes we're doing an operation where we're doing calling, or we have computers where people are coming in the internet, and we have someone that can chat with them, chat rep they call that. And so we have ways to contact people there. And then in the lower left here, these account or territory reps are salespeople who do not leave the building, but are mainly working on the telephone with specific accounts. And so, and of course, they use computer and email also. But those are ways where they've gotten the accounts or the business has gotten them, and those reps keep current with those customers. So that would be an inside sales force. We also have the possibility of an outside sales force. The scariest picture there is probably the one in the upper left-hand corner. Many of you have heard me talk about the time while I had an insurance agency, and as a matter of fact, my wife still operates that agency. But at one time, we had 30 insurance agents selling Medicare supplemental insurance. That's insurance for people on Medicare who are older than 65 years old. And all our sales reps went door to door. That's how I taught them to go. And it was interesting because I set up a telemarketing force for them, a few people in the office doing telemarketing, and the people I taught to go door to door could always make a sale. The people I taught started off giving them leads and sending them to those lead addresses to talk to people who had already been talked to on the phone, could make a sale. But the day I did not give them leads, they made no sales. Okay? So a totally different approach. But that's probably the scariest part for everybody, although it's the very same skills that are required of somebody who's somebody in your sales office, in your retail outlet, who's actually dealing with customers. You need to be able to deal with customers in a very similar way. Yes, the outside sales is a little harder if it's out and out cold calling, but that's what it's about. Sales reps, that's where you give a representative to a certain territory, and they're responsible for those accounts within that territory. You can also, and again, these reps may represent several different companies. You want them to not necessarily represent competing companies. You want them to represent companies that are complementary to your product or service. Okay. The lower left corner is talking about outside sales force that's working business to business rather than business to customers. So two different business to consumers, I should say. So, and then the lower right is just outsourced telemarketing. Again, telemarketers call up, and if they can make a sale over the phone, they do it. Okay. As a matter of fact, that's what they get paid to do. So those are some various ways of handling outside sales, a little different than inside sales. And we'll talk about more about that in a few minutes. How do you pay your sales force? Well, most people like to know they've got money coming in at the end of the week, okay, or the end of the 2 weeks, or whatever your pay cycle is. So a salary only gives the employee the security that they need, that they know that they've got money coming in, and they'll work to get that money. But when you add salary plus commission, and basically what commission is commission is a percentage of the sale. So let's say the sale was $100 and you tell them they get a 10% commission. Well, that means they get $10 on every $100 they sell. That's commission only. Okay. And of course you can have salary plus commission, where they have the basics, the income to make sure that they survive, and then if they're highly motivated, they will go out and do the extra work to make the commissions. The commission only sales is the tricky one. It takes a certain amount of personal drive and initiative to realize that yes, I can survive on commission only. I have to work really hard then, but you've got to be consistent and show great initiative in doing the sales work. You can't just sit back and hope for the sale to come to you. And so you get a totally different set of motivations when a person is being paid by commission only. And on that same $100 sale, if you were paying them on commission only, you might be paying them a 25% commission or a 30% commission on that $100 if that's the only money they're making. But if you're giving them a base pay of, say the equivalent of, $10 an hour, and so you got $10 an hour coming in, and then anything extra that you sell, you get a commission on. Well, there you might be using a 10% commission on $100, where your commission only person might be getting 30% on a $100 sale. So it depends, and a lot of it depends on your product and how you structure it. There's nothing sacred about those numbers I just gave you. Okay, but I mean, for years I was strictly wage person. I was at a base salary of whatever, either with the government or with various organizations I was with. And then I went into the commission sales area. And yes, it was kind of scary at the beginning, but I functioned strictly on either commission sales or my own business, which is the same thing as commission sales, for over 25 years. So it can be done, and we lived well. So it can be done. Okay, looking at sales channels. Now, sales channels are a little different. That's how do you go from you to the customer. One way is going direct, okay, where it's your salesperson out talking to your customer. Okay. Another is using an agent, similar to the representatives that I talked about a few minutes ago, where they're an independent contractor and they're probably representing other products, not just yours. Okay. An example of agents, we hear them all the time, are real estate agents. Okay. And we say, oh wow, we have a real estate agent working for us to help us buy the right house. Actually, the real estate agent is an agent of the seller, okay, because the seller is who's going to pay that agent the commission. But they have a legal contract with that seller. Well, oftentimes your agents, even for other products, will have a contractual arrangement with your company as to what they will sell. They may or may not represent other companies. It just depends. Now, your product may be such that it can be sold through storefront operations. Okay, maybe it's appropriate for a big box store, or maybe it's appropriate for a store in a mall, or maybe it's but it's other retailers selling your product. They probably sell a variety of products. So you could imagine if you had something that was appropriate for bathrooms. Let's say you made a product that you wanted to sell to people, and you're going to sell it through a retail outlet like Bed Bath and Beyond, or Target, or Walmart, or someplace like that, and you want it in their bathroom supply area. Okay, so that's an example of that kind of using brick and mortar retailers. Now, obviously, you can use online sales depending on the nature of your product. And you can be the only seller online, or you can have many representatives online. It just depends. Licensing is an interesting way. That's where other companies buy the rights to your product, something you invented, and then they sell it and make it and sell it, maybe even with their name on it. But every time they sell one, they pay you a little bit of money. So that's the difference there. And then wholesalers and distributors. Wholesalers are ones that will buy bulk product from a manufacturer, and then they resell it to a variety of retailers. Okay? Distributors do something similar, except that distributors may not actually be buying the product. It depends on which way the agreements are worked out. Okay. We talked last week about a pipeline, about lead generation, and we used the representative story of a pipeline. Basically, what you have to do is put an awful lot into the start of your pipeline, an awful lot of contacts, cold calls, lead generation, trying to get people to just say they're interested in your product. Okay? Once they're interested, you need to find out if they're qualified. And you might find out out of every 25 who you can generate some interest or some contact with, that only one will be interested. Of the ones that are interested, you may have to get 10 people interested to find one that's qualified to buy your product. Now again, it depends on whether your product is expensive, whether it has certain legal requirements for ownership, like what we had with the Medicare supplemental insurance, various things like that. But not everybody who may hear of your product and indicate some interest may actually be qualified to buy it. And then of those ones that are qualified to buy it, you need to get people really, really excited about buying it. And again, there's nothing sacred about these numbers. Every product, every service has a different range of numbers. But here, you might need 3 people reasonably excited about your product and qualified and really hot to trot, if you will, but only one of them will buy. So you need to work the numbers, and that's one of the things that's difficult for salespeople, especially outside salespeople. So we looked at the sales cycle. We looked at how it starts, and the fact that everything starts with a cold lead. Sooner, that you have to have a starting point. Maybe it's an advertisement, whatever. You're going out to everybody who reads the newspaper. Well, everybody who reads that newspaper, you put your ad in, that's prospecting. They're all cold leads. The warm leads are the ones who come back to you and say, gee, I'm kind of interested in that. And then you talk to them and you get the opportunity to talk to them and you find out whether or not they're really interested. Are they qualified? Do they have the money to buy your product? And you move progressively, getting a narrower and narrower group until you get to the ones that have a very high probability of purchasing your product. You have to, obviously commit them to buying. Then once they're an existing customer, you need to keep them, because existing customers have a lifetime value, which we talked about. So, and they will refer people to you. And so they will be a source of more prospects. Okay. We talked about what actions need to be taken during a sales call. This can be a cold call where somebody's out, talking to customers. It could be somebody in a kiosk in a mall, just approaching different people as they walk up and down the mall about your product. It could be your clerk at the retail store, the one that's actually out in front talking to the customers. But the main thing is you got to listen to what they say. Listen to the customers. That's why the ears are so important. Instead of telling them about your product, what you want to do is ask them questions to find out what they're really looking for. What is it that they want to get out of your product? Okay? And so obviously you're only interested in what they get. That's the only thing they're concerned with, is what they get. They don't care what you do. They don't care what your product looks, how you feel your product looks. They only care about what they get. So it's what's your product going to make them feel like. Invariably, people don't just, very often, unless they're me, they don't just turn around and say, yeah, I'll buy that. Instead, they'll say, well, what about this? And they'll ask you a question. What about this? Will it fit in my front room? Or will it connect to my existing computer? Whatever. And so these are objections. You have to be prepared to answer those objections. And then finally, nothing happens in the sales process until you ask for the money. Okay. We talked a little bit about the organizational hierarchy. and the fact that you can organize your company in a couple different ways. One is a very flat organization where they're between the lowest worker actually interacting with the customer or doing the job and the top person in the company, that there are very few intermediary managers or supervisors. Okay, or you can have a tall organization where there are many. You have a factory floor operation, let's say, and you have a shop foreman, and then you have a shift supervisor, and then you have a vice president of operations, and then you have an executive vice president, and finally you have the owner of the board of directors of the company. So you can have a very tall bureaucratic organization. Each have their place, although bureaucratic organizations tend to be very slow in what they do. Okay. Another distinction that we looked at last week was the distinction between managing or supervising and leading. Two totally different approaches. Okay. The one, obviously, orders are given and we're expected them to be carried out. In the other, orders are given, yes, but they're given in a way of this is what we're going to do, and we're doing it together. It's a pulling process. Okay, everybody pulls together, and so normally, if a leader doesn't lead, the workers don't follow, and that's a maxim from my days in the military. If you don't lead, your troops don't follow. So you need to get out there and actually lead. More effective than being a manager. Okay. So, probably one of the more important things we discussed last week was Southwest Airlines. If you have the time, I would strongly urge each of you to go do a little research on Herb Keller and how he founded Southwest Airlines and the philosophy he put in place that is the corporate culture of Southwest Airlines. It's just amazing. I did some research on him for graduate work, so I would say it is well worth your time if you want to figure out how to structure your company to read what some of the experts have done, and this man is by far an expert. Okay. So obviously, if you have any questions, make sure you get a hold of me, and I'm more than happy to answer those questions. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to look at the people side of business. Okay, and people side of business involves hiring the right people. There are a variety of folks who are out there, many of them extremely highly qualified, who may be the ideal employee for you, but picking them is the tough thing. Okay, so a couple things we need to know. There's a couple different ways to get workers. One way is an employee, where you actually hire someone and they work for you. Another option is to use some independent contractors. Okay? And there's some differences between these two, obviously. They really revolve around who determines the what, where, when, why, and how that the work is done. So, for instance, the most important ones as far as the Internal Revenue Service is concerned and the government is concerned is who sets the hours that are going to be worked. In other words, when is the work going to be done, where is it going to be done, and what work is going to be done. Who sets that is a criteria for separating whether the worker is an employee or an independent contractor. Now, if it's an employee, then you're going to have to pay them either an hourly wage or you're going to have them on salary with W-2s. Okay? They're going to have to be, if the corporation offers any benefits, those employees have to receive the benefits. The company, who's going to provide the tools. So when the person walks in to go to work, their computer should be there, their desk should be there, whatever you're going to have them use. Okay, if they're employees, all the tools should be there. So you don't expect an employee to come in and bring their own tools, except in some very rare cases. Okay, the manager or the owner of the company is deciding when, where, and how the work gets done. So if those qualifications are met, then the person is an employee. If, on the other hand, you're only paying a fee on a 1099 form, and everyone understands a W-2 form is where a company reports the wages and salaries they pay their workers. A 1099 form is an IRS form where the company reports how much money it paid to outside contractors. An outside contractor does not receive any benefits, so you don't have to worry about providing health insurance, life insurance, vacation time, any of that, well, because the independent contractor is going to pay their own taxes. Okay? They bring their own equipment and tools. So if you hire a computer programmer to put together a website for you, they're probably going to be able to do much of that work off-site. They're probably going to be using their own facilities and then just checking in with you to show you the results and show you what it's going to look like on your computer. Seldom are they going to come to your location. Now, again, it depends on the nature of the work you have the independent contractor doing. I told many of you about the consulting work I did as a transportation costing consultant for the trucking industry back in the late 70s and early 80s. Actually, I guess it was the early 80s. And there, yes, I would walk into a truck company that I was contracted to do work for, and I would be working with their programmers. I would be designing the layout of what was to be accomplished in the accounting area, but their programmers would do the work. So I didn't actually have to do the programming. But I was setting up the underlying studies and setting the procedures in place that the company would be able to function and continue those computations and studies without me being there. And so that was the advantage that I offered as an independent consultant. Okay? Again, the independent consultant or independent contractor is going to decide when they do the work. So if you have someone designing a website for you, they may choose to work at 2 in the morning. They may choose to work at 3 in the afternoon. What does it matter as long as they get the job done? Okay. Likewise, they may choose to work in an office. They may choose to work in their home. They may choose to work in your facility, but they make the choice. And invariably, independent contractors will work for many different companies. So at the time that I was working for a company in Tennessee, I was also working for, I had a client who was in Canada and had another client in Florida, all at the same time. So obviously I didn't spend every day at just one client's place. I had to spread my time around. So I have multiple clients. Okay. Now, let's go back and talk about just the employees. You have two categories of employees. Okay? What we call exempt employees are ones that do not meet the requirements to be paid minimum wage or to be paid overtime. What happens is if you have an executive or a professional or administrative people or outside sales people that are commission only, okay, you don't have to worry about paying a minimum wage. You don't have to worry about overtime. But you must be paying them more than $455 a week currently. Okay? So this is kind of a rule that the government uses to make sure that that they're not really, workers who you're claiming are exempt. Because if they're exempt, there's a whole bunch of things a whole bunch of rules you don't have to follow. Okay? The key, though, is it is not the title you give them as the owner or manager of the company. It's what work they actually do. And so if the IRS ever questions a particular arrangement, or the government does, they're going to interview the employee or the exempt employee, and they're going to ask them a bunch of questions. And if those answers come back sounding like an hourly worker, then they're going to say, wait a minute, this person isn't really exempt. And now they have to qualify for all these laws. Okay? In other words, you've got to make sure that you've handled these laws. Basically, all the labor laws, whatever they are. You've got to pay them either on an hourly basis. Normally that's what's happened. You can pay them by the piece, but if you do, the total piece rate you pay them has to at least equal minimum wage. Okay? So that's the bare minimum. And then any work over 40 hours must be paid at time and a half. Okay? So those are non-exempt employees. Basically think of it as hourly employees. Anyone you pay by the hour or by the piece, those are non-exempt. Anyone you pay a salary to, so if you hire someone that's going to be a vice president in your company and they're on salary and you don't expect them to work 40 hours a week. You expect them to do the job when it needs to be done. And if that means they need to spend 60 or 70 hours a week, that's what they're in for. Okay, it's whatever it takes to get the job done. Other times, maybe they only have to work 20 hours. It just depends. Now, I will tell you, the vast majority of American workers who are under the exempt category work a dickens of a lot more than 40 hours, especially when you're in management. Okay, the higher you are in management, the more likely you are to work more hours because the business is constantly on your mind. You may be home thinking about it. You may be solving problems, and when it's your own company, it's yours 24 hours a day, 24/7. You wake up in the middle of the night thinking, gee, I could do this, and maybe I should arrange that. And it's constantly on your mind because that's where your success comes from. Okay. Okay. Oh, this is a person you really don't want to run into. Okay. So, if you don't want to have to talk to the gentleman or lady who wears the black robe, you probably ought to know what the laws are. So, we've mentioned minimum wage. Not only do we have federal minimum wage, but also many states have a different minimum wage than the federal. Invariably higher, but different. Okay? And realize minimum wage are for unskilled workers. Okay? These are people who do not have much in the way of work skills, and probably not much education either. Okay. You have rules about overtime. We talked about that a few minutes ago. What the working hours are. Okay? What kind of meal and breaks you have to provide, or a lunch break and other breaks. Okay, bathroom breaks basically. So there has to be a certain amount provided to hourly workers. So you need to know what those rules are. Okay, if you're going to be doing training for your workers, then those workers are going to need to be paid for the time that they're doing the training. So that's an important aspect. There are certain amounts of time off that you have to provide your employees. Most people are familiar with the fact that a mother having a child, as a matter of fact now even a father, can get time off, maternity leave. There's also requirements for leave for death in the family, illness, what have you. So you need to be aware of what the time off requirements are. Okay. Some of those are, and most of the time off is unpaid time off. Okay, a good example is someone who's in the military, in the reserves, and their unit gets called up. Well, you have to give them the time off, but you can't hire someone to take their place, and then when they come back say, "Oh, I'm sorry, there's no job for you." You have to have their job available to them when they get back. So, and the same thing's true for maternity leave. Okay. Obviously, there's a whole series of groups, virtually everybody, who you cannot discriminate against. And so you have to be very careful in how you're dealing with people. You don't want to discriminate against anybody because the person that may be different color, different ethnic background, different religion, different sexual preference, may be the very best worker you can get for your project. So you don't want to rule anyone out. You need to give everyone a fair shot at the job. Okay? Equal pay for equal work is a critical matter. If people are doing the identical job and have the identical responsibility, there is no reason why a man should be paid more than a woman. Okay? As long as all the criteria for that particular position are met, each one should be paid equally. Okay. Now they may have different experience. That may change things, or different abilities, or different responsibilities. Okay, that's different. But if they're doing the same thing, they need to be paid the same way. Also, hiring disabled, you cannot discriminate against people with physical disabilities if they are qualified to do the job. So if you have somebody who's their main job is going to be talking on the phone, doing sales work on the phone, and typing on a computer, and they're unable, they're wheelchair bound and unable to walk. Well, that doesn't make them unable to do telephone work and computer work. So therefore, you cannot discriminate against them if they are qualified to do the job. Okay? Child labor laws, don't have much child labor problems here in the United States now. The laws are very firm about that. Although, when I was growing up, my father had his own business connected to our house, and I seem to recall all of us ended up working in that business at one time or another. Would you call that slave labor? No, no, no. Dad and Mom were wonderful to us, right? And we learned a lot about working too. So the main thing is that you can't hire children beyond a certain age, beyond whatever, check out the law and make sure you know what it is. But you do need to be careful if you're using your own children in the job. Okay? Need to be careful with that if they're actually employees. Okay. The other thing is the person legally qualified to, or eligible to work here in the country? So they've either got to have a green card or be naturalized citizens or born here. So, and now businesses are required to check that. Okay. And then there's a whole spate of rules relating to OSHA rules relating to safety. And again, you've got to provide a safe workplace for your workers. So be aware of that too. Okay, and then there's a whole group of a section of laws that say what posters you have to have published. In other words, you have to have put up what these rights are of workers, and it has to be prominently displayed in certain places in your company. So be aware of the importance of making sure the posters are right, because otherwise someday some inspector is going to walk by and say, "Oh, wait a minute, zing you for that, you don't have that, you're not," and whatever the penalties are then. So you don't want to get involved with that if you can avoid it. So the safest thing is get somebody who knows the laws to tell you what you can do and what you can't, and do whatever research you need to make sure you are legal. Then you don't have to go see the person wearing the black robe. Okay, so when it comes to paying employees, remember, most employees, when they think of pay, they think of that check and how much money they take home each week or each 2 weeks or whatever your pay period is. Okay? Okay, considering that paycheck that the employee gets, and again, they think of that as their money. But if you look at this pie chart, that paycheck is just the blue part. Okay? And so the other little wedges of the pie, the yellow and the blue and the kind of reddish and the greenish and whatever other color it is, are all pieces that are either coming out of the employee's gross pay, or that more importantly, that you as the employer are matching, okay, contributing to. So, if you're providing health insurance for your employees, they may pay a part of it, you may pay the lion's share. If you're contributing to their retirement plan, it lets you set money aside that you don't have to pay taxes on. In other words, the business is not taxed on that amount of the profit that they generated, that they put into the employees, they contribute to the employee's retirement plan. So you save some taxes by doing that, so there's an incentive to help fund the employee's retirement plan, but it's money you've got to pay out. Social Security, you have to match Social Security and Medicare payments. And so the employee pays part of the Social Security and part of the Medicare, and you pay the other part. And then whether or not you provide disability insurance, life insurance, educational assistance, those are your choices, but it's more money you pay out. So from your standpoint, the total cost of the employee is quite a bit different than the amount of that take-home check that that employee takes home. The take-home check that the employee takes home is what they think they're worth. Okay, that's what they think they're getting. Even though, yes, they can see on the stub what the withholding was out of their check for the other stuff, and they may see what your contributions are, but it doesn't feel like real money because they can't put that in the bank. So it's important that you realize that you have extra costs for every employee and that you make sure your employees are aware of what you're contributing. Okay, moving on. Again, trying to pick that right person. It's a little different than just putting a help wanted sign out in the front window. Okay, there are so many good possibilities, especially now that you have the ability to find employees through the internet. And Craigslist and what have you, a variety of places that you can try to find employees, LinkedIn. So you may find some extremely highly qualified employees. So the question is, how do you go about selecting the best one? Okay, and once you have selected a really good employee, what happens down the line when you have to get rid of that employee? It's one thing if the whole company is being downsized. It was interesting, companies go through downsizing all the time, and you hear the stories of somebody who was involved in actually doing the downsizing. They were the ones who organized it, and they did many of the formal notifications of the employees where they talked to them face to face and said, we've got to let you go. And they went through the whole thing, and then they walked in the last day, after they'd gotten rid of everybody, and their boss called them in and said, I got to get rid of you too. So if the company is downsizing because it can no longer support that workforce, that's one thing. It's another thing if you're getting rid of an employee who is incapable of doing the job, and you've gone through all the appropriate methods to encourage that employee and to train that employee, and they still appear incapable or unwilling to do the job, you have to let them go. Okay, that's different than letting go a trusted employee who's been very important to your business for a long time, and now you just say goodbye. You're gone. And it happens every day in the big companies. A little different in little companies. Little companies, everyone knows everybody. They're a tight-knit group. But when companies get really, really big, it's a situation that's more difficult to deal with. And so, but these are human resource problems, and it's devastating to your company to keep employees on when you can no longer pay them. In other words, when you're not sure there's going to be enough money coming in to pay the payroll, you sure don't want to keep them on. Let them go out and try to find something else. Be fair with your employees. I can remember a major company that my son was working for, and understand he has a doctorate degree in microbiology. Okay, he had been working with this company for a couple years, and he just didn't feel comfortable with them. They weren't exactly in his field, and what they wanted him to do wasn't exactly what he was thought he was going to be doing. But he had there was a whole department there. There were about eight or 10 people. And so he's doing his job, but he's looking. And he finally found another place to go to work at. And so he gives his 2 weeks notice. He's being fair about it. He's telling the company, this is, really a major, change in my career. It, moves him along. And, they said, well, thank you for letting us know. And thank you for the 2 weeks notice. And the last day of the 2 weeks, okay, so he's worked out his 2 weeks. On the last day, they came in and announced to the 8 people in that department, by the way, we're closing this department. You're all fired. They didn't use those words, but they gave him a separation pay, and everybody walked out the door. Now the problem was the other 7 people weren't prepared. Here my son was moving to another part of the country and moving on to a new job. But what about these other 7 people? Okay, and so now my son's been in this other job now for 8 years, so this was a while back. But the thing was, 8 years ago was just before the big recession, so or in that general time frame. So you have to be aware of what companies do and how you're going to handle those situations when it's your company. Okay, let's take a few minutes and talk about operational matters. Okay, obviously there may be some need for some office facilities. Now, the office facility may be a small desk in the back room. If you have a restaurant, you may literally have a small desk in the back room that is your office. That's where all the paperwork gets done. Okay, well, so, maybe you got 2 desks. Maybe you got a desk, front and back desk. One for you and one for whoever's doing, some other paperwork for you. So maybe your office is in your house. Okay, it just depends. But you need some kind of office facilities. It's almost impossible to run a business without some kind of records, and that requires nowadays computers. Okay, so depending on your operation, you may need a storefront operation. You may have customers walking in to buy. Now you need to have the facilities for them to see the product they're going to buy, ask questions, have an inventory on hand for them to be able to walk out the door with the product. So now you need retail facilities. Each one requires something a little different. Let's say that you've got a really cool invention that you're going to make. Okay, so now you have to manufacture whatever that thing is. And so how are you going to get it manufactured? Are you going to do it yourself, or is that something that's going to be farmed out? If you're going to do it yourself, you're going to need building, you're going to need tools, you're going to need equipment, you're going to need storage facilities, a whole bunch of stuff. Okay? And what goes hand in hand with the manufacturing facilities is if you're going to make the stuff, you have to have somewhere to store it. More importantly, if you're going to buy something from some other manufacturer and resell that, you need storage facilities for that too. So it may be just a back room if it's a small operation, and you've seen many storefronts where the front part is the retail facility, and there's 2 doors in the back, and you go back there, and that's where all the extra stuff is stored. Okay, so that may be the warehouse facility. Or if your company's big enough, you have to plan on how you're going to grow the company and what happens when you're so big that now you need a major warehouse facility and a major manufacturing facility. So there's lots of options. And again, the manufacturing may be something you farm out. You go to some other company who already has a manufacturing facility in place and would be willing to make your product too, and have them make it, and then you buy it from them. So okay, and obviously we've spoken many times about the importance of the online facilities. So you've got to have a website that people can go to. It has to be robust enough that you can have many users on your website at one time. It doesn't crash very easily. It has to be ways to record who's inquiring about your business, what their inquiries are, a way to get back to them very quickly when they have questions. And sometimes when you're dealing with a small company, and just had this occasion happen just a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago, I went into the part of the website that says contact us and for technical information or whatever, technical support, and I typed in a little question and I got an answer back from the CEO of the company, well, the person who started the company. Now I know they're a small company. Here I am in Florida, they're in Seattle. Okay, they're not a 500 employee company by a long shot. I doubt there's 10 people there, but it was really nice that they got back to me immediately with a very good answer. They didn't have what I'm looking for, but they're planning on creating it. It's a software-based stuff. So your online facilities, you can't just have a website and forget about it. It's got to be dealt with regularly, and there has to be ways for those potential customers to get hooked to you. and so you can actually turn them into customers. Okay, now again, I don't know how many of you in your business idea are looking at manufacturing a product, but you need to be aware of what the steps are, what the basic steps are. So there's several things you have to manage when you're making things. You've got to know when and what you're going to have to make. How much can you make in that facility? How is the shop going to be organized, and who's going to report to who? How are you going to measure when your employees are there and getting paid and when they're not? How are you going to schedule the work? Not only the flow of the orders, but the flow of workers. How many workers do you need on what days and what shifts? If you're operating a multi-shift operation, is your daytime shift the busy one, or is the nighttime shift the busy one? And you need more people there. What do you do with the excess scrap that's left over if you're making stuff? You want to recycle it, obviously, to get the most bang for your buck. And then how do you make sure that the quality is as high as possible, and make sure that you got the paperwork to prove it? Look at the hassle that the car dealers are going through now, or the car manufacturers are going through with the airbags that explode. That's poor quality control. Now, many of you say, well, I'm not going to be manufacturing anything. I'm going to be providing a service. Well, service has a whole different set of similar kinds of problems. Are you getting stuff from someone that you're using to provide your service? Well, then you need to deal with your suppliers. Okay, if you're, what happens if the client that you're providing the service to wants things done a little differently? How do you handle the change? Okay. Invariably, problems will come up. How do you handle the problems? Okay. Need to make sure that things are going when they need to be going and everything is safe. Okay? So there's a constant revolving wheel, if you will, of continual, although what they say here is process improvement. Okay? So you need to keep the service, what the customer ultimately needs. And guess who controls all that? Remember, as the owner of the company, or the senior manager, very similar to what they told me in the Army. They said, Lieutenant, understand this, my first day. When you command troops, you are responsible for everything they do or fail to do. And the same thing is true for managers. Okay? Managers and the owners of a firm are responsible for everything their employees do or fail to do with regard to that work. Okay. So, not only do you need to be planning the situation and organizing your work for what it is today, but you need to be planning into the future. Okay, and of course we have some problems. We need to know what's going to be happening with the business fields. The field you're in, are you going to be moving from that particular field to a new field? Is that field evolving? How are you going to keep up with that evolution? Of course, we have very little certainty about what's going to happen in the future, but we need to be cognizant of that as things are. If you look out into a relatively short time frame, now it's a simple matter of keeping your business operating as efficiently as possible and doing the basic research and development so that you can keep your operation as efficient as possible, but that you can be looking toward the future for what will improve your product or service. Okay? Now, a little further out, when things are a little bit hazier, you need to be considering in the little bit more distant future, what are going to be the new products that are going to be required, or new services, or new ways to provide that service. And then finally, at the far out end, you need to be looking at the long term, if you will. What do you think can happen in the future? It's kind of like the businesses that, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the private space business, SpaceX. And here they are trying to design private space vehicles, that will be providing services to NASA and ultimately taking tourists into space. So they're really long-term view. This is not something they can do tomorrow, okay? But they're working on it. So anyhow, supply chain. If you're providing anything other than a service that you provide yourself, okay, anything else, you've got to get the stuff you're providing, and you've got to find a way to get it to whoever's going to be the ultimate customer. Okay, so we call that supply chain management. And again, you can read about that in the book. We can talk about it. But basically, it's all the different steps that you have to go through from the point where the product is thought up and designed until it's created, until it's inventoried, and until it's shipped directly to the customer receives it, and the customer keeps it. Or they return it. What provisions do you have for the returns you're going to have? What percentage are going to be returns? Are you going to provide warranty that they can return it within so many days if they're not happy with it? Especially if you're doing internet sales. So you have to have the transportation for the return too. Who's going to pay for that? Are you, or do you expect the customer to pay for it? Customer's not going to be happy to pay for anything they don't have to pay for. So do you build that into the price of the product? So what percentage do you think might get returned? So all this is part of that supply chain management. Okay, there is a flow, as obviously as I think we've been able to deduce from the time that an order starts. Okay, so we've talked about this a little bit. Be aware that you need to be able to manage that. Okay. Now I know we've run out of time, but let me bring up this other thing. In addition to everything else you have to think about, you have to think about the emergencies. Here's a building that was torn up in a tornado. Okay. Yes, we have insurance, but it's nice to have alternative plans in case something this serious happens. So where do you store your data off-site in case your building is destroyed? That kind of thing. Okay. So obviously, if you have any questions, let me know. I realize we're running out of time. We've got some reading to do. We've got some work to do this week, a couple chapters. Your discussion for this week is going to deal with selecting the right employee. Your assignment is going to be a case study of Zappos. And your final project, again, you need to be working on that final project, starting to get your defining what your team is going to be.